Good morning. I am Miriam Epskamp, the resident religious educator for this congregation. If you're just joining us on Facebook or Zoom, welcome. We're glad you're here. Our opening reading this morning comes from the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, who shared these words during her president's report at the 61st General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association in Portland, Oregon in June of 2022. We are in a churn of change. Systems and practices that we've relied on are breaking down and shifting. While what is needed is being imagined, but not yet here, in times of change, loss, and uncertainty, there is a risk that fear will dominate and cause us to cling to the status quo and systems that no longer serve us just for that feeling of certainty they give and the fear of moving forward into the liminal more fully. But let us remember, we are not a people of fear. We are a people of faith. We are a religious people of imagination and possibility. We are a living tradition. We know that revelation is not sealed. I recently heard a fascinating story about a young researcher named Elizabeth Schrader, who, for her master's thesis in New Testament studies, was examining the oldest and most complete text of the Gospel of John. It's called Papyrus 66, and it dates from about the year 200. And recently it has been digitized, so all sorts of people like Elizabeth, who would not have access to it in the past, now can look at it with fresh eyes. As Elizabeth was taking a close look at chapters 11 and 12 of the Gospel of John, the part that tells the story of the death and resurrection of Lazarus, she noticed something odd. Somebody, at some point in time, had gone over the original handwriting and changed one of the names in the story from Mary to Martha. In Greek, it would be just an easy change of one letter, the iota to the theta. Now, this may not sound like a very big deal. Mary, Martha, well, who really cares? But John chapters 11 and 12 contain a very important foundational part of the Christian Gospels. It's called a Christological confession, where Jesus asks one of his followers if they believe he is the Messiah, and they say, "Yes, I believe." So there is a Christological confession in all four books of the Gospel. And in Matthew, Luke, and Mark, it is the disciple Peter, Jesus's right-hand man, the rock on which the church is built, who makes this confession. But in John, it's a rather minor biblical character of Martha, who says, "Yes, Lord, I believe you are the Messiah." It doesn't quite make sense. Elizabeth Schrader hypothesizes that the conventional reading of this story has been wrong for centuries, and that it was actually Mary Magdalene who makes this confession. She is one of the most prominent women in the New Testament, who is with Jesus when he dies, and he is one of the first people to learn of his resurrection. Now, right now, there's a bit of a debate going on in some theological circles about this finding, whether the change in the papyrus was intentional or accidental, if Mary's role in the gospel is being erased, and what it means for our understanding of Scripture and for Christianity on a whole. Like I said, this is a very interesting story, and if you want to find out more, you can Google Mary the Tower for all the details. I'm sharing it with you this morning because when I heard it, I became very curious about how major changes are made to the Bible in this day and age. Will somebody send out an email to all of Christianity instructing them to get out their whiteout and change things up? And if so, who's going to be sending this email? According to the historian Diana Butler-Bass, there is an organization in Germany called the Nestle-Aland Translation Committee of the Greek New Testament, whose job it is to make sure that the translations of the Bible are as precise as can be and as close to the original manuscripts as possible. Bass writes, "These are the guardians of the New Testament. They are as stuffy as you imagine them to be. They're basically a whole bunch of very old German men." Now, she doesn't say it, but I imagine that they're most likely all white, all traditionally educated with Reverend Doctor somewhere in their titles, most likely comfortably affluent, and they have spent their entire working lives immersed in the books of the New Testament. When new research like Elizabeth's is presented, they weigh the evidence and decide among themselves if a footnote will be included in the next edition of the new revised standard version of the Bible, if a change to the actual text will be made, or if nothing will be done at all. So it sounds like to me that a small homogenous group of men get to make the call for millions, hundreds of millions of Christians around the world. I may be wrong about this, but that's what it sounds like to me. Now, I found this interesting because right now in Unitarian Universalism, we're contemplating a major change to our foundational documents that is almost on par to us as changing the text of the Bible is to Christianity. We, of course, do not have one sacred book that guides us. What we have is bylaws. Unitarian Universalism was intentionally designed as a creedless faith. None of us are asked to make a confession of belief in order to join our congregations or preach from our pulpits or call ourselves UUs. Sometimes people rather lazily say this means that Unitarian Universalists can believe anything that they want. But that is simply not true. From the very beginning, the admittedly mostly white, affluent, traditionally educated men who came together to join the American Unitarian and American Universalist traditions into a brand new faith recognized there needed to be some boundaries. In order for the new church to thrive, its people must have a shared set of values. So when they came together in Boston in 1961 to draw up the bylaws of the new Unitarian Universalist Association, in Article 2, right after the legal descriptions required in Article 1, they drafted 6 principles that each Unitarian Universalist congregation would promise, would covenant to follow and promote. And in the hopes that they were creating a living religious tradition that would change and evolve as new truths were revealed, they included in Article 2 a charge to periodically review and rewrite the principles and put the new ideas to a vote of the people. Now, as Pat mentioned, the last time the principles were changed were in the 1980s, and that was due partly to the changing role of women in society and the growing environmental movement. They were completely rewritten in 1987 after a continent-wide consultation with as many congregations and individual members as possible. Through focus groups and questionnaires and meetings with different identity groups, the special committee in charge with rewriting the principle strove to meet with people of all ages and genders, racial identities, spiritual beliefs, and walks of life to gather information and insight. The resulting 7 principles they produced were put to a vote at the association's General Assembly that year, and it passed with only one vote of dissent. If you've ever been in a group of Unitarian Universalists, you know that is a miracle. The chair of the special committee, the Reverend Walter Royal Jones, wasn't exactly humble about this achievement. He wrote, "Apart from the Quakers and their time-honored preference for consensus, it is unlikely that the history of religion provides any comparable example of such intentional and committed use of inclusive, non-hierarchical processes to produce a guiding statement." Excessively proud as he was of his work on the Seven Principles, Reverend Jones did not believe that his committee had produced a guide to Unitarian Universalism that would last for all the ages. I imagine he expected a rewrite of our principles would come in his lifetime. Reverend Jones died in 2010 at the age of 90. And lo, the Seven Principles still abide. They read, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, the acceptance of one another, and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and society at large, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part." Now, there was an attempt to change the principles in 2009 and add language that more fully articulated our growing commitment to anti-racism and multiculturalism. But those changes failed to pass at General Assembly by just 13 votes. What was missing, perhaps, from that 2009 effort was a wholehearted commitment to collective decision-making that had made the rewrite in the 1980s so successful. So a few years ago, in 2017, amid growing calls to add an 8th principle to the list that would require Unitarian Universalists to directly address racism and other oppressions, the UUA leadership called for a review of all sections of Article 2 with the goal of revising, replacing, or restructuring our guiding principles as needed. They started by creating a racially diverse commission that included young people, elders, clergy, and lay people, and they came from all parts of the country. And then, mindful of the work done by earlier generations, they set about gathering as much information as they could from individuals, congregations, and groups across the UU world. They asked everyone they spoke to these questions. What is essential to you about being a Unitarian Universalist? What language helps you to describe the heart of Unitarian Universalism to other people? What is missing from our current principles, covenants, and faith language? What must we do now to pave the way for the future Unitarian Universalism we dream about? Those are good questions. At the most recent General Assembly this past June, the Commission gave presentations to bring everybody up to date about their work, and they engaged people, both who were at General Assembly in person and who attended virtually, in discussions about several topics, including the importance of religious belief, freedom of belief, the importance of freedom of belief to Unitarian Universalism, and what we can do to balance the rights of the individuals with the needs of the collective. They ask questions about our shared values and how we might add action and accountability to how we articulate them. They had discussions about what it means to covenant with one another, what full inclusion would look like and feel like in our communities, and what sources of inspiration serve to enrich and expand our faith tradition. The Unitarian Universalist Association co-moderator, the Reverend Meg Riley, described these presentations as the juiciest part of General Assembly, and I would agree. They were rich and thought-provoking and impossible for me to sum up for you succinctly in 15 minutes or less. So I encourage all of you to watch the video recordings of General Assembly and hear them for yourself. We'll put a link to the recordings on our website and in our September newsletter to make it easy for you. I also hope that we'll find a way to sit down and talk about the discussions and what we heard. To date, the Article 2 Commission has engaged with thousands of Unitarian Universalists from all sorts of demographics, identities, and theological and philosophical beliefs as they prepare to share their vision of what our principles and purposes need to say if they're going to guide us in the transformation of ourselves and our community and our faith to face the challenges of the 21st century. In the coming months, the Commission will make a formal presentation to the Board of Trustees of the UUA in preparation for them being placed on the agenda at General Assembly in 2023 for their first vote. And I am here today to say it is important for you, yes, you, wherever you are on your Unitarian Universalist journey, to stay engaged with the revision process. In our faith tradition, you are the ones that get to make the call at what our sacred bylaws look like. You get to decide what's included and what gets crossed out. You get to make the call by directing the voting delegates that this congregation will send to the next General Assembly in June to tell them how to cast their votes, to accept the Commission's proposals, to suggest amendments to what they have suggested, or to maybe even vote no and stick with the status quo. It is up to you. As we engage in this important work, I want you to remember the words of Susan Frederick Gray. We are not a people of fear. We are a people of faith. We are a religious people of imagination and possibility. We are a living tradition. And guided by our principles, we are building a beloved community infused with our highest values, our highest shared values of freedom and justice, fairness and belonging, and most of all, with love. May it be so.